Thank you for visiting Tbilisi State University's Multimedia Center. Rayhan, you're covering news and current affairs for BBC. Before that, you worked as a Central Asia correspondent. Caucasus has specific characteristics, social, political, cultural. And from your experience, how can you describe Caucasus? Why it is a different region?
Okay, I think I will compare it to the region where I worked in the past and where I come from. Of course, the Caucasus and particularly Georgia is a much more kind of livelier, country in terms of the political scene, in terms of freedoms, and that makes a huge contrast to Central Asia. So, for example, covering elections in Central Asia, it's not really that exciting story to cover because most of the time you kind of know the outcome. It's very predictable. Whereas here, I think in Georgia, because it's more free, it's more kind of democratic country, that makes it much more interesting to be a journalist here.
Can you tell us about the career path you took to get where you are today?
I was a radio DJ in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, where I was born. As a radio DJ and TV talk show host, with absolutely oblivious to what's been happening in my country, because when I was working in that capacity, it was mainly about entertainment, and there was a lot of self-censorship, so we never would think about anything political and so on. But then I went to study to the United Kingdom. I went to university in London, and that was my way into internet. I'm talking about early 2000s, and I started learning more about the region, about my own country. I was studying media and international relations. So through my education in the UK, I've learned quite a lot about my country, what's been happening, and of course I became very passionate about media environment. So that was the early steps, and through my studies I wanted to case study the work of the BBC in the region, and they had all sorts of problems at the time, and still, of course, they're not allowed on FM station, so all sorts of problems related to censorship. And that's how I got my footing to the BBC World Service Radio, with headquarters in London. It's a fascinating place with the best journalists from all around the world reporting from London about their regions in their own languages. So that was my kind of entry ticket to the BBC, and it was 2002. So since then, through my work and interest, I stayed with the BBC. I worked in different programs in different capacities as a producer, a radio reporter, presenter, and it was all in Russian language because we were broadcasting to actually Central Asia and the Caucasus. There was a program that was broadcasting to these former Soviet countries. But then I wanted to move on, and I really wanted to, my ambition was to report in English, and I knew that for that I had to pursue kind of further studies, and I did master's degree in television, current affairs journalism. And it's a great place to study in London at City University because you're studying and at the same time you're living in a country where you have the best examples of media and print journalism. So that's it's a long way to answer the question, but eventually I got to television part of the BBC, and I worked as a producer in London. And while working as a producer, I was learning quite a lot about the production, about what goes behind the scenes. It's not something what people see, production values, how news are delivered, how stories are told, and it was very, very valuable time for me. But I knew that my ambition was to go and report. I really wanted to be a reporter. So I kind of sponsored my own first trip and it was to Armenia. I decided, I just had this idea that I wanted to go to 10 countries and do my own stories and then come back to London and try to show it to editors, try to get on air. So Armenia was my first choice. I was interested in the country. We had the BBC correspondent at the time here, so I had to ring him up, Matthew Collin, and say, do you mind if I go? I'm really interested. I have a couple of stories that I would like to do in Armenia. So I went, it was in 2008, and it worked out quite well. I've managed to come back to London to sell some stories for Reuters television and to do one small report for BBC World Television. And yeah, that was great, because then it was on air, so I kind of took the initiative into my own hands. I knew that if I will be sitting there in a newsroom, being the producer and waiting for someone to walk past me and see, oh, how fantastic and beautiful she is, shall we make her a reporter? I mean, things like this don't happen. You know, you have to take the initiative, and if you know exactly what you want to do, you need to have a plan and you need to do something about it, you know. So, and then I think things kind of fall into the right place, and it worked out for me. So I think if other journalism students, if they have certain ambitions, they have certain desires, then you need to think carefully about what is it that you exactly want, why you want it, and how you're going to get there. And I think everything is possible, yeah.
Can you describe your typical workday at the BBC?
I'm employed on a freelance basis for BBC News. I do represent BBC News in the region, and when big story happens, they come to me, so they call me. I'm their first point of contact. That's sort of contract that we have. But I'm not contracted to sit in the office and work from 9 to 6. Although we do have an office here, we have BBC Monitoring. It's another arm of the BBC, and they do a very important job. They monitor local media from Georgia, Azerbaijan, Iran, Armenia as well. They translate it into English language, and they make this content available for those who are interested in the region. I mean, you have to pay subscription and so on. So this is what BBC Monitoring does, and they're increasingly also doing some journalism based on their knowledge of the region, of the situation. They write journalistic pieces. So we do have a wonderful office here in Tbilisi, and I use it from time to time. But okay, going back to your question, of course I start my day with a coffee and reading news stories. You read, you familiarize yourself what's coming up, or unless you know what's coming up beforehand. And if it's an important story, then I try to ring London, speak to my editors, and say, this is what's happening here. Are you interested in any form of coverage? Normally, what I do day to day is what we call news dispatches. It's a very short news story written for BBC World Service Radio. For us at the BBC, because if you think about it and if you look online, you will see that BBC headquarters in London in Oxford Street, it's called New Broadcasting House. It's a huge building with so much information coming from all over the world. So for us, the basic of information is to write this short news dispatch. So you have to concise a story into a 1 minute script, written script. So it will be maybe about 150 words. And it's a certain skill which you develop. So then it's in the system, and it gets translated into different languages depending on which programs, which outlets are interested in this particular story. It gets republished by BBC News Online. So that's what I do on a daily basis with news.
What was your first big break in this industry? Your first story that gave you the best chances to express yourself and was very successful?
My first big break, it's something when you get exposed as a reporter, and that of course relates to the story that you're covering. I would say that the biggest news story was back in 2010 when I was working in Central Asia. There was an uprising in Kyrgyzstan in which the president, at the time, Kurmanbek Bakiyev, he was ousted. So there was a big protest. People were in the square, in the central square in the capital Bishkek. Protesters, they seized some arms and weapons from the police, from riot police. So it was a really kind of violent riot. And I was in the square. I drove that day. Our BBC bureau is in Almaty in Kazakhstan, and it's about 3 hours drive to Bishkek. So we drove to Bishkek, and we thought that it's going to be just normal kind of protest. Police will come, they will suppress it, they will take people to jail and it'll be over. But it turned out to be a massive story, because protesters, they took weapons, they took arm shields and other riot gear from riot police, and they were there in the square, and then the government opened fire on these protesters. Something like 85 people were killed that day, 85 people that were in the square. And of course for us, being in that square and seeing this chaos, seeing blood, seeing people dying, it was shocking. It was the first big story. And knowing how to report it, so we had to quickly kind of film and send this information to London. So I would say that was the first big break for me. And then going back to the base where we were working, because the story was developing so fast, we had to update our reports almost every half an hour. You know, the protesters, they moved from the square, they were really angry, they moved to the main government buildings, the General Prosecutor's Office, police headquarters, and they were smashing buildings. It was really violent. It was the first big story, and of course I will always remember. But again, it gives you, when you're reporting on a story like this, you get this adrenaline rush as a reporter. You know, you get very kind of focused, and in a strange way you get excited, because it's just developing in front of your eyes, and you have this very privileged, you know, opportunity to explain the story to global audiences. And we're talking about, you know, millions of people worldwide that might be listening to BBC World Service Radio at that moment, or watching BBC World TV.
So you have covered uprisings, ethnic conflicts, political transitions. Were there any hardships you had to overcome while you were covering those topics?
As a journalist?
Yes, as a journalist.
Yes, of course. As a following this uprising that I was talking about in my previous answer, there was an ethnic war in Kyrgyzstan, again, in southern Kyrgyzstan. And it all happened at a time when the authorities, everything was in transition, because the president, he ran away from the country, there was interim government, so things got a bit out of control. And I remember when we arrived in the city of Osh, where all those ethnic clashes were happening, there was no police, there was no representative of the government or authority. And in a situation like this, you as a person with the microphone, you represent certain authority for people who are in trouble, at a state of shock, or in this very critical situation. Someone standing there and filming, you represent certain authority. So people expect from you answers, you know, they want to know what's going on. Even though you're there with them, you know, you don't know more about the outside world, but I felt that it was a lot of pressure. And I remember we worked for a long time, and we went to bed maybe at 3 a.m. We got up, we were woken up at 6 a.m. And some of these people came to us and they said, everybody's waiting for you outside. And so we went outside, and it was a huge crowd of 500 people. And they wanted us, journalists, to go and talk to them, to tell them what was happening, which I thought, you can't do anything, you know, you have to go and do it, because when people are in such a state, you know, they're agitated, they might turn against you. So it could be quite dangerous as well. So we went and we addressed people, and we said that we were doing everything that we can, we're reporting, but it's not up to us how quickly the response will come, how quickly they will get help from the outside world. So that was a challenge, of course. And also being of certain ethnicity, that is another issue. And I mean, I can talk about it for a long time, but me being an ethnic Uzbek, because I come from Uzbekistan, and reporting on the conflict that is between Uzbeks and Kyrgyz, of course it had issues, because I could not go and report on the other side. It was too dangerous. And then later, this whole situation, it haunted me, because in Kyrgyzstan I became this evil figure, you know, who was there just to talk about one side of the story. And it was very unpleasant, of course, at the time. It was very unpleasant, because I was doing my job, I was reporting, but also bearing in mind, you know, that going to the other side was out of the question. I could not do that. I would not have risked. It's just not worth it, you know. And very soon we had the enforcement, we had reinforcement, we had more journalists arriving, and journalists who were English people, they could go to both sides, and so the issue was solved. But the initial days when everything was very raw and happening, it was complicated, being of certain ethnicity and reporting on a conflict. Ethnic conflicts are the worst, and I think here in Georgia, of course, people have the experience as well with the wars in Abkhazia and wars in South Ossetia. And I'm sure, you know, you as a Georgian journalist, you can't really go and report from those areas, you know, so yeah, it's problematic, I think.
Many students here at Tbilisi State University want to pursue their careers as foreign correspondents. What will be your advice as they are taking this tough and adventurous and also competitive path?
To become a foreign correspondent?
Yes.
To work for international media, or to work for...
To work for, let's say, for international media.
I don't have one kind of recipe, you know, there's no a rule written, this is what you need to do to become a foreign correspondent. Everyone really kind of should use their you know, brain, and have a vision, have a plan. So if you really want to work for an international broadcaster, why not? Increasingly, I would say, international broadcasters, they want to hear stories that are happening in the country from people who live in this country. And I think in Georgia it's not a problem. A lot of people speak English. So, for example, if we talk about Al Jazeera English, which is quite a successful international broadcaster, they started with this formula. You know, they started hiring people in the countries that could speak English. Okay, with a little bit of accent, but they know the story, they understand the context, and they can tell maybe a better story than someone who comes and it takes time to learn and so on. And I think because of this success of Al Jazeera, the BBC also became much more diverse. So at the time when I was starting, to be a foreign correspondent and not to be British or not to be English or white, whatever, Oxford, Cambridge educated, it was quite hard. You know, there were 2 or 3 people at the time when I was starting. But now it has changed a lot. Now the BBC is going for, they want bilingual reporters. So they want reporters that can report in their own language and equally can report in English for international audiences. So I think all the opportunities are out there, and if you really want to pursue this career, I think you need to watch the channel, you need to familiarize yourself with the style, what is required, and then look for opportunities.
Journalism will kill you, but it will keep you alive while you're at it, said editor of the New York Tribune. Do you agree, and what is your favorite description of journalism?
I think I would agree with that. I don't know about the killing, you know, you can jump out of it just before it kills you, I suppose, you know, if you're worried about it. But I think there are lots of wonderful, fantastic quotes given by writers, journalists, people in the field. I don't have a motto, so to say, but I always, when I was asked questions like this in the past, I always say that I think it's the biggest privilege to be this bridge from the area where you are, from the individual story that you're trying to tell, to the outside world. I think it's a great, absolutely fantastic privilege to be this voice that tells the story, that explains it to the outside world, and makes people care. Because when people care, when we tell a story about someone who lives here in Georgia, in the conflict area, you know, close to the administrative boundary line, and someone is watching this story in Germany and in England, wherever, they watch and it touches them, then I think our job is done. Maybe not necessarily those people who watch it, they won't go and demand, you know, certain rights, although if they do, that'd be fantastic, of course. But even if it makes them think about the existence of such a problem, I think it's already a certain achievement for us. Making people care with the way we tell stories, I think that's a great achievement. And if you can get there, then you certainly, you know, you've learned the skill, I think.
Rayhan, where do you think journalism is heading in this digital age, and what are the major challenges that journalists are facing today?
I have this kind of love-hate relationship with social media. I need it because, for example, Twitter is the fastest way to find information. Facebook is the fastest way to get in touch with people. It used to be, you know, of course we still all rely on our great contacts and business cards and whatever system you have for your contacts. But in my experience, at least in Georgia, and actually in the region, in Armenia and Azerbaijan, the quickest way to get in touch with people is just to send them a message on Facebook via Messenger. You get response half an hour, you know, and you find people very quickly. So it's very important tool for us. And in that sense, I love social media, but I don't like it because it just, you lose your focus, you know. You go on Facebook wanting to send a message to someone, to you, because I want to make an appointment with you. Then I see a post from my friend about whatever they did somewhere, and I'll start scrolling down. 10 minutes later, I'm like, why am I here? Oh yes, I came. So I think that is a challenge.
One of your colleagues, Natalia Antelava, pointed out on her TEDx talk that journalists today cover events as if they happen out of the blue, and they deprive audience of the big context of individual stories. Do you think journalism is simply not designed to stay on a story, and what is the solution for this?
The whole idea, what Natalia was mentioning about journalists coming, you know, out of the blue, they come and they report on certain events. There's another way to describe it. It's called parachute journalism. And yes, I agree it exists. I'm not a fan of it. I feel that we don't actually do that much justice to a story. I have one example. Earlier this year in September, I went to Moldova they've been having this anti-government protest there. It's related to massive corruption scandal in the country. Yeah. And there were funds and resources from the BBC to go and report on a particular protest on the weekend. So we were there for 3 days. When you get to the country, you start meeting people, you begin to understand it a bit more. You get kind of more under the skin, you know, beyond what you read online. But as you get to that level, it's time to leave, it's time to go. And I think it's not right, because you only tell this story on the surface. You know, I reported, I did my job, I did radio reports, I did online reports for the BBC, but it was not in depth. I wish I had an opportunity to go outside their capital to see what's happening and to tell the story in a wider context. There's no opportunity to do that, because it all bounds to money, how much it costs to stay in the country, how much it costs to keep the crew in the country. And I think it's a problem. So staying on a story is a very good concept, and if it works out, then yes, I think, you know, it will be great.
In the end, I want to ask you about Georgian media. You have been living in Georgia for more than 2 years now, and you have become familiar with Georgian broadcasters and their problems. And how can you describe Georgian media, their drawbacks and improvements?
This interview is happening now at the time when the major story dominating news agenda here in Georgia is the case of the main opposition TV channel, Rustavi 2, the court case over ownership. And I've been following it, of course, but it's very hard to explain to an international audience all these little bits and bobs, who said what and who's claiming what and who's behind this person and why is it important. So in that sense, it is quite a local story, you know. It's important for international audience if you listen to one side of the argument, and one side of the argument is that it will really damage media freedom in the country. A lot has been said by Western officials, by embassies here, about their concern regarding this whole case. I think it's great that a debate like this is happening in Georgia, that there is lively media environment. Even comparing to your immediate neighbors, to Armenia and Azerbaijan, particularly Azerbaijan, where the situation deteriorated so much in the past couple of years, and it's a very sad outcome for a lot of journalists there who are behind the bars now for doing their jobs. And we always talk about it. I mean, when we report about Azerbaijan, human rights organizations talk about it, but it's not changing the situation on the ground. And I'm now on a blacklist in Azerbaijan. I cannot go there. So it's, I think, of course, if you compare the media environment here and there, it's a huge, huge difference. But again, you know, without being critical, because I think the level of journalism, there is definitely room, you know, to grow. And I'm talking about quality journalism. So, for example, when these recent polls came out, you know, about the popularity of political parties, 40% of the electorate is undecided. They are tired of this whole fighting, you know, and they don't want to vote for any of these parties. So where are the reports about these people, about these undecided people? Why are they undecided? You know, because their issues are not being addressed. Because what are the main issues in Georgia that come up in every single poll is unemployment. You know, what is being done about it? I don't mind if it's a media which is pro-opposition or pro-government. I don't really see that much coverage of these stories, of social stories, stories about people, not just politics, you know, who said what and who is right and who is wrong and who's planning a revolution, but people, because at least for us, you know, we call it like human angle, human story. That's what makes people care. That's what makes it interesting to be a journalist, to go out there, to talk to them, to tell their story. And I think it will be great to see kind of journalism developing. And also, I notice when I go to press conferences, always lots of cameras, and press conference ends and everyone packs and just leaves, you know.
Yes.
There's no culture of asking questions beyond what's been said. And I think journalists, they shouldn't take what is told just because someone is sitting there doing a press conference. You know, you should always ask questions. You should always challenge what's been said, or you know, and kind of provoke a new debate. Or, I mean, I'm not saying that provoke a debate and stay there and kind of argue it. It's not the point. But ask questions. This is your number one kind of job description. You know, you're a journalist. You have to ask questions. If you don't ask questions, it means that you're either not interested or you're not listening. Now, of course, there can be deadlines, they need to rush, they need to edit stories, but I think asking questions should be there. And I would like to see press conferences here, news conferences being, well, maybe I'm generalizing. I mean, some news conferences, of course, journalists ask questions. It's not like, but maybe I'm talking about one of my last experiences that they film and they go. There's a really nice place called the Frontline Club in Tbilisi. So I think it's a franchise of the big Frontline Club that exists in London. Yes. And it's a fantastic place. If you live in London, everybody wants to be a member, you pay a certain fee and you're a member. They invite always interesting journalists, interesting people who are passing by, people who come here to present certain stories, books, whatever it is. It's a great place to go to meet interesting people. So recently I was there and there was a visiting editor of LA Times. He was talking about investigative journalism, and there were some people in the audience, and a journalist. She has an investigative program here in Georgia. I don't know which channel and I don't know the name of the program. Maybe Monitory? Maybe. Because but she took the microphone and I'm talking about asking questions. She kind of went on a bit, you know. She thought, oh, I'm just having a good chat with this guy, and we were all sitting there because it was translated into Georgian into English. But she was talking about how many investigations should we have per week, and he said, well, you can't really put a you know, time frame. You say, okay, I only have 3 days for this investigation, because investigations can be unpredictable, and they are most of the time. And she said, well, we're encouraged to do investigations about the previous government in Georgia, all the misconduct, whatever, you know, bad things that were happening under the previous government. And his answer was, he said, yes, I'm sure it's very important, but actually your job is to do investigations about the government that is sitting now, you know, the active government, because of course it's much more difficult to do. Now, sitting in Georgia, you can go out there and do investigations about UNM, what was wrong in the 9 years, but they're gone for now. Now you have a different government. So, and is everything what they're doing, is everything right? Or other issues that people are interested in? Anyway, that was his answer, and I thought it was a pretty good answer, you know, to talking about investigative journalism, that not just focusing on the past, although it is very important, but also on present.
Thank you, Rayhan, for your answers.
Thank you, Salome, for inviting me. Okay.